Good evening. Don't you love it when a plan falls into place? Flushed with success of my lecture on Beethoven's late works, I'm gathering you together this evening to name the murderer. Excuse me, somebody has carelessly placed that upside down. I will hence invert it. I'm sure we've all been in these situations when we were students. I vividly remember turning up for an exam, the precise nature of which currently eludes me. And I must confess, mea culpa. The previous evening, I had had a few ales, officer, and I probably was ill-suited to actually sitting the exam at that particular juncture. But one of the questions was, expatiate upon one of the following works. Now, I don't know if it's the same in music college anymore. Well, as far as I'm aware at the moment, there is no music college, just like there is no anything else concurrently. But I was confronted with a sea of pieces I'd never even heard, or indeed knew the first thing about. So I settled on Haydn, and I settled on a symphony. I think it was about 12,014, I think. And I proceeded to expatiate on this symphony in immense detail, excruciating minutiae, about how, off the top of my head, this is donkeys years ago, how it was in 7 movements, which needless to say it wasn't, how it was inspired by Renaissance polyphony, which clearly it wasn't, how it was written after he'd had a few ales, as indeed I had when I was trying to do this exam, and how the reason it was called the Surprise Symphony was because it failed to deliver any kind of surprise whatsoever. And amazingly, I passed. Just goes to show what a few ales can do for the old spirit, doesn't it? I think. Anyway, this evening I would like to expatiate further upon the subject of something which is very, very close to my heart. Now, I think most of us, well, certainly anybody who learned the piano as a child, had a little bust of Beethoven, or a little bust of Bach, or a little bust of Mozart, or a little bust of Philip Glass, if that was more your scene. And it would be there next to the metronome, like that. And you just look at it every day, without ever having really engaged with the force of nature that is the composer. Well, I not only have a bust this evening for you, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you about an old friend of mine with whom I attended school. Hold on there a second. This is, by some definition, a bust. And it is a bust of my old school friend, John Brahms. Brahms. It's hardly a quantum leap, is it? So we'll just put him here for the moment. Now, my old school friend, John Brahms, was born, like I was, in Queen Charlotte's Hospital, Hammersmith W6. We were almost complete contemporaries. He was, I think, maybe 120 years older than I was, at the time anyway. But we were both born at the same time. And some confusion arose here because I was also born more or less about the same time as Lord Lindley, Viscount Lindley. And I always thought, and I tried unerringly to convince my mother of this, that I had far more in common with Princess Margaret than I did with my mother. I smoke and drink too much, and like most of us, I like a man in uniform. But my mother would have none of this. She was quite categorically clear that she was my mother and that was an end of it. Yeah, which it pretty much was. Anyway, so John Brahms, we grew up together. And then his mother, who worked at a local department store called Grace Brothers, and she went by the name of Miss Brahms. Now, in those days, illegitimacy, children out of wedlock, strictly verboten. In a way, the most contemporary people growing up in contemporary society would probably fail to appreciate the extent. I mean, there used to be all sorts of places where children born out of wedlock were sent. Horrible places. Anyway, so John Brahms and I became very, very close. Then one day, Miss Brahms, his mother, decided that she would quit her job at the local department store. What was it called? Something Brothers. Grace Brothers. That was it. She had a few friends there, I think. But Miss Brahms quit her job in Grace Brothers. Not sure what sort of contract she was on. Anyway, whichever, it's neither here nor there. And she and John toddled off to America, to Ohio. Now, we had been at primary school for a short period of time, but because of the illegitimacy and out-of-wedlock nonsense, off they went to Ohio to start a new life. Now, it was whilst he was in Ohio that John, who then subsequently changed his name to Johannes in order to avert confusion with the then famous footballer John Barnes, which sounds, John Barnes, John Brahms, lend me your grey mare, whichever, homophonously a bit similar. So to avoid confusion with the footballer, Miss Brahms changed his name to Johannes. Now, it was whilst he was in Ohio that he developed this lifelong interest in folk music. However, a lot of people think it's principally sort of Austro-Hungarian folk music that interested him. To begin with, this was simply not the case. For whenever he came back on vacation, as they called it, we would meet up and I'd read through his cahiers of reminiscences and memoirs of his time in Ohio. And it seems that, in fact, an awful lot of his music, which subsequently became much better known, was in fact based on an entirely different ethos. I'll demonstrate something in a second. But there you are, you see. In fact, I remember little details about John. He was born just after 6:30. I think, if memory serves, he was born in 1833. A lot of people misattribute his place of birth as not being Hammersmith. It was Hammersmith because I was there, Lord Linley was there, Princess Margaret was there, my mother was there, Miss Brahms was there, Mrs. Slocum was there. Can't remember if Mr. Humphreys turned up, but certainly a whole bunch of them from Grace Brothers turned up. Anyway, great fun. Happy days. But on to the musical element of this. If you don't mind, I will remove my clerical attire. It's a bit warm this evening, is it not? Oh, that's much better. Far more liberating. I think we all know Brahms' first piano concerto. Well, maybe some of us don't. There was a time I didn't know it. I played it a great deal in the end, but there was a point at which in my life where I'm sure I didn't know it very well. For instance, about the time I went to school with John Barnes. I'll come back to that in a future one, about my brief and ill-fated career as a fledgling footballer. Anyway, so if, as I discovered from his cahiers that he brought back from Ohio, if you think of the accepted version of Brahms' first piano concerto in D minor, opus 15, Walthamstow 4, if we think about this, we were all acquainted with this, I think. Now forgive me, I haven't played this for some time. I think we all know that. This, amazingly, was the original version of this, the famous second subject group of the massive, gargantuan first movement. And these were inspired from his trip to Ohio in his formative years. This was the original version. different place had that version become accepted into the general repertoire. There is another one. You may find this interesting, you may not find it interesting, the choice is entirely yours. The famous intermezzo in E flat, opus 117, has a marvellous lullaby sort of feel to it. And it goes something, and I would say my hand to God, sort of hand to God. It goes something like this. I think a lot of us know that from associated boredom. However, I think you may find a sort of American flavour to the original version of this Opus 17 number 1. It's got a faint sort of American accent to me. I could be wrong. Anyway, because it was Johannes, or John as I used to know him, it was all done in the best possible taste. So moving on swiftly from Miss Brahms and Mrs. Slocum's Pussy, I frequently get asked how to make the great monuments of the piano repertoire more accessible to the amateur. Why people ask me that, I'm usually in there for a packet of fags, but people still come up to me and say the same thing. How on earth do you make these great monuments and behemoths of piano literature more accessible to the amateur? Aha, I've solved that actually. So, if for example we take a marvellous work like Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto in D minor, opus 30, it's a great, towering masterpiece of a work. But we all sit at home, and we all and so on. Try this. It's very, very simple. And you can entertain your friends for hours with this one. I promise you. It's like your own personal karaoke machine. So, you take this one here. You follow me at the back. Then you move up a couple. You take these two here. See, it's so simple, folks. Even I can do it. Bear that in mind. And then you just go like thus. Always helps. Ribs. See? Endless hours of fun. You can do this with most things. It's usually helpful if they're in D minor. It's not imperative, but occasionally it helps. For example, to revert to Brahms' First Piano Concerto that I just completely trashed a few moments ago, we take that as an example and off you go. Smile and wink at the audience, because I promise you, if people pay 65, 70 quid for the festival hall, they want more than this. They want a bit of that and a bit of smiling. So, Brahms' First Piano Concerto. Do things that aren't in D minor, but let's stick to D minor for a second, right? Because we seem to have found ourselves wholeheartedly in this key. Oh dear. Bear with me. Stop doing that, George, I can see you. Let's go through the massive oeuvre of Beethoven piano sonatas. Well, you can probably get away with quite a few things here. I mean, he's the only one I can think of in D minor. See? I mean, you can, all periods of music. Stockhausen, for example, Klavierstück 9. Mozart. See, it works with pretty much everything. Popular tunes, if that's more of your bent. Let's think. See, as long as you wink at the audience, smile occasionally, wow. A smile is worth a million words, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, I just remembered something. My father, in earlier years, was a grave robber. And, well, it was, it kept us in beer and skittles when we were kids. Stopped us having to go up chimneys and all those sort of unsalubrious kinds of things that obviously they have to do nowadays. So, let's drink to that. God bless you, Johannes. That was also my father's name. Pure coincidence, of course. But when Johannes died, sadly... Oh, there's another one. Anything, all sorts of festive occasions you can entertain your family and friends. See, it's marvellous. It's a gift, I promise you. If you take nothing away from this really is a gift that keeps on giving, as I think I've just proved. I could do some Bach, but I really can't be bothered. And also, I can't stay here idling with you all evening. I've got things to do, and actually, as cobblers, I haven't got anything to do. I may as well sit here talking to you for hours. Except, of course, that wouldn't be fun, would it? Well, certainly not for you. Anyway, during my father's brief saute into grave robbery, he managed to get me a souvenir from my dear old friend John Brahms. God bless John, all who's sailing it. You could call it a legacy. Hold on there a minute. Oh, let go of it, you son of a bitch. It's mine, he left it to me. He left it to me, let go of it. So, you could call it a legacy. Anyway, this was actually worn by John Brahms. Johannes, probably better known to you. It's one of my most treasured possessions. God bless you, mate. Anyway, on that happy, uplifting note, I shall bid you all a good night and bonsoir.